I spent $15,000 flying my parents in for my wedding, but they skipped it for my cousin's baby shower and texted, "Weddings are overrated." Mom added, "We don't approve of her anyway." So I sent them photos of the ceremony and their empty front row seats. That night, I stopped paying their mortgage and cut off every bill in my name. By morning, they were begging. I thought my wedding day would be the start of everything good in my life. Instead, it became the day my parents delivered a betrayal so shocking, it forced me to confront a devastating truth. They didn't just disapprove of my wife. They were actively trying to control and break me. I was 32 when I finally walked down the aisle, marrying Natalie, the woman I loved. For years, my entire 20s had been a blur of hard work, instant noodles, and saving every single penny. So, by the time I met Natalie, I had my own house, a stable career, and for the first time, a real sense of pride in myself. Everything felt like it was finally clicking into place. My parents, though, had always been complicated. Growing up, they loved my brother and me, but their love always came with unspoken strings. I was the responsible one, the one who moved back home during college to help with finances, the one who co-signed their second mortgage when they almost lost the house. I even set up all their bills under my name because my credit was better. For years, I just accepted it, never complained. It was just my role in the family, until it wasn't. When I proposed to Natalie, I expected them to be thrilled. Instead, my mom's first reaction was, "Are you sure she's the one? She doesn't really fit our family." At first, I laughed it off. My mom had always been critical of every girl I dated. But over the next few months, it became clear this wasn't casual disapproval. She refused to use Natalie's name, calling her that girl. If we invited them to dinner, they'd cancel last minute with flimsy excuses like, "Oh, we forgot we promised to watch a movie," or "Your dad's tired." Meanwhile, they never missed a single gathering with my cousins. I kept telling myself, "It's just a wedding. They'll come around." I just wanted peace. Planning the wedding was stressful enough without feeling like my own parents weren't excited. Natalie noticed it, too, though she tried to be gracious. I spent months organizing everything: the venue, caterers, the band. One of the biggest expenses was flying my parents out. They live across the country, and I wanted to remove any excuse they might have not to come. I shelled out a whopping $15,000 for their flights, hotel, and a car rental for the entire wedding week. It was a massive hit to my savings, but I genuinely believed it was worth it to have my family there. My brother RSVP'd immediately, so at least I knew he'd be there. I pictured them in the front row, watching me marry the love of my life. That vision kept me going through all the chaos. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, I called my mom to go over last-minute details: rehearsal dinner, outfits, seating arrangements. There was a pause. "Actually, Connor," she said, her voice flat, "we won't be able to make it." My stomach dropped. I laughed nervously. "What do you mean you can't make it? I already booked everything." She cut me off. "Well, your Aunt Lisa is throwing a baby shower for your cousin that same weekend, and we just can't miss it. This is her first baby. You know how important that is." I was absolutely speechless. "You're skipping my wedding for a baby shower?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. My mom sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "Connor, weddings are overrated. People get married all the time. A first baby only happens once." I hung up the phone and just sat there, staring blankly at the wall. When I told Natalie, I could see her trying to hold back tears. She didn't want me to feel guilty, but I knew it cut her deeply. Later that night, my dad texted me 3 words: "Weddings are overrated," as if that was supposed to make me feel better. The next day, my mom followed up with another text: "We don't approve of her anyway." That one stung. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. It wasn't about scheduling. It wasn't about money. They just didn't want to be there because they didn't like the woman I chose to marry. I remember sitting in my office, my hands clenched into fists, replaying every single sacrifice I'd made for them over the years. Every bill I'd paid, every time I'd bailed them out, every holiday I'd spent fixing things around their house instead of resting. And they couldn't give me one weekend. One single day. The day of the wedding came, and despite everything, it was beautiful. Natalie looked absolutely stunning. The weather was perfect, and all our friends showed up ready to celebrate. But there were 2 glaringly empty chairs in the front row, right next to my brother, meant for my mom and dad. During the reception, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of those empty seats. Later that night, After everyone had gone home and we were finally in bed, I sent the pictures to my parents with a short message. Here's your view from today. I stared at the screen, waiting for a reply. None came. Not that night, not the next day. They didn't even pretend to apologize. And that's when something inside me shifted. For years, I had been their safety net, the one quietly keeping everything afloat. Their mortgage, their utilities, their phone plan, even their streaming subscriptions. Suddenly, I didn't feel like doing it anymore. I didn't feel like being the responsible one while they treated me like I was disposable. That night, I opened my laptop, logged into every account with my name on it, and started shutting things down one by one. The mortgage auto payment? Canceled. The electricity bill? My card removed. Their phone plan? Disconnected by morning. I didn't send a warning. I didn't explain. I just turned off the faucet that had been feeding them for years. By sunrise, my phone lit up with 37 missed calls. It buzzed nonstop that morning, but I didn't answer a single one. I just sat there with my coffee, scrolling through the list. First mom, then dad, then my brother, then mom again, over and over. Finally, a string of texts started coming through. Connor, what happened to the house payment? Your dad just got a notice that the electric bill wasn't paid. What's going on? Answer me right now. This isn't funny. And then the one that made me put my phone face down on the table. If this is about the wedding, you're being childish. Grow up. I actually laughed. One of those humorless, exhausted laughs. Childish. After everything. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop and decided to give myself one day where I wouldn't have to think about them. Just one day where my life wasn't defined by whatever emergency they were creating. But the calls didn't stop. In fact, they escalated. My brother texted me next. Mom's crying every night. Dad's threatening to sell the house if you don't put the payments back. That one was particularly interesting because the house was still in my name. Years ago, when they were behind on the mortgage, the bank wouldn't refinance under their credit. So, I had stepped in and taken responsibility, which meant if they sold the house, I'd have to sign off on it. They weren't just asking for my help. They were trying to guilt me back into being their ATM. It would have been almost funny if it didn't hurt so much. I ignored them for a week. Natalie and I went on a short honeymoon. Nearby, just to breathe after the chaos of the wedding. I thought maybe they'd cool down if I gave them space, but instead, when we got back, I found a letter in my mailbox from my dad. Not a card, not an apology, just a 2-page list of everything they claimed they'd done for me over the years. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. It read less like a heartfelt message and more like an invoice. At the bottom, my dad had scrawled, "The least you can do is take care of us now." I crumpled the letter into a ball and tossed it in the trash. When I told Natalie, she put her hand on mine and asked quietly, "Are you sure you want to keep doing this with them? You don't owe them your sanity." She was right, but a part of me still felt like I was betraying some invisible rule by cutting them off. That guilt is what made me pick up the phone the next time my mom called. Finally, she said the second I answered, her tone sharp. "You've put us in a horrible position, Connor. The internet got cut off. The lights almost got shut off yesterday. Do you realize how embarrassing this is? What will the neighbors think?" Not once did she say she was sorry for missing my wedding. Not once did she ask how Natalie was or if we were enjoying being newlyweds. I stayed quiet until she finally asked, "Well, are you going to fix this or not?" I said calmly, "No, I'm done fixing things for you." The line went silent for a few seconds. Then I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said. "I spent $15,000 to bring you to my wedding, and you chose not to come. You called my marriage overrated. You told me you don't approve of my wife, and now you want me to keep paying for your life like nothing happened?" "No, not anymore." She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she went on the attack. "You're going to let us lose the house after everything we did for you." "You're not going to lose the house," I said, keeping my voice steady, even though my chest felt tight. "You're just going to have to pay for it yourselves, like everyone else does." "You ungrateful little," she started, then cut herself off and hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe they'd get the message. But if anything, it made things worse. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my brother sitting on my porch, waiting for me. "We need to talk," he said as soon as I stepped out of my car. He looked uncomfortable, which wasn't like him. He was usually my parents' golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Inside, over coffee, he tried to play mediator. Look, man, I know they messed up by missing the wedding, but this is too far. They're not used to handling the bills on their own. You know, they can't afford everything. I crossed my arms. And whose fault is that? I've been paying their bills for almost a decade. If they can't handle it, maybe it's time they figure out how. He sighed. Mom said you're punishing them just because they didn't like Natalie. She didn't just not like her, I said, my voice rising despite myself. She disrespected her. She disrespected me. I gave them every chance to show up for me, and they chose not to. He rubbed his temples. Fine, but you know they're talking about taking legal action, right? Dad says since the house is in your name, you have a responsibility. I cut him off. They want to sue me? Go ahead. But if they think they can guilt me back into being their free bank, they're in for a surprise. My brother left soon after, clearly frustrated. And that was when I realized this wasn't just going to blow over. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to wake up one morning and decide to treat me with respect. They were going to double down until they got what they wanted. The next week, I started getting calls from other family members, my aunt, my cousin, even my grandmother. Why are you letting your parents struggle like this? They asked. You know, they don't have anyone else to help them. It was clear my mom had been busy spreading her version of the story. In her version, I wasn't the son who paid for her plane ticket and hotel room just to have her ghost me. I was the selfish son who abandoned his parents for no reason. One night, I got a text from my dad. If you don't put the payments back on by Friday, we're done. Don't bother calling us again. I stared at the message, feeling that mix of anger and heartbreak rise in my throat. They were trying to turn this into an ultimatum. I didn't reply. Instead, I went upstairs, opened the filing cabinet where I kept all the mortgage paperwork, and started going through it line by line. If they wanted to make this a war, I needed to know exactly what my position was, legally, financially, everything. And that was when I noticed something I hadn't paid much attention to before. The mortgage balance was much lower than I realized. After years of making payments, the house was almost paid off. I sat back in my chair, an idea slowly forming in the back of my mind. For the first time since this whole mess started, I didn't just feel angry, I felt calm. Because now, I had leverage. And that's when things really started to escalate. A few days after that realization about the mortgage, I decided to stay quiet and watch what my parents would do next. If they were bluffing about taking legal action, I figured they'd either back down once they realized I wasn't budging, or they'd actually try something. And if they tried something, I wanted to see how far they'd go. The next Sunday, I was working in my home office when Natalie called out from the front porch. Connor, you need to see this. I walked outside and froze. Sitting in my driveway was my parents' car, and standing beside it was my dad, red-faced and fuming, holding a stack of papers. My mom was sitting in the passenger seat, arms crossed like she was the wrong party here. My dad didn't even say hello. He just thrust the papers toward me and barked, "Sign these." I looked down. They were quitclaim deed papers. They wanted me to sign the house over to them fully, completely. No strings attached. I laughed, but not because it was funny. It was that hollow kind of laugh you do when you can't believe what you're seeing. You drove all the way here to try and get me to give you the house. My dad's jaw tightened. It's ours anyway. We paid for it until you took it over. You wouldn't even have a house of your own if it wasn't for us teaching you how to be responsible. Now stop acting like a spoiled brat and sign the papers. Dad, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. I saved your house from foreclosure. I paid for years on it. You wouldn't even have a house if it wasn't for me. And you want me to just hand it over because you decided my wedding wasn't worth attending. My mom rolled down the window and leaned out, her voice sharp. You're holding it over our heads, Connor. That's not love. If you really love this family, you do this without making us beg. I stood there in the driveway for a long moment, holding the papers, my hands shaking. This wasn't just a request for help. This was them trying to rewrite the story, trying to make me the villain for finally standing up for myself. I'm not signing anything, I said, finally, and I handed the papers back to my dad. He didn't take them. He let them flutter to the ground between us, his eyes narrowing. Then don't come crying to us when you're cut out of the will. That stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't that I needed their money. I was fine on my own. But the fact that they were willing to use something like that as a weapon against me made me realize just how conditional their love had always been. When I didn't respond, my dad stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think you're so smart, Connor, but we still have connections. Don't think we won't fight this. Fight what? I asked, incredulous. Your own son for a house I've been paying for? Go ahead. See how that looks to a judge. He glared at me for another moment, then turned and got back in the car. The tires squealed as they backed out of my driveway. I stood there for a while after they left, my chest tight, wondering if that was really the last straw. If we just crossed a line we couldn't come back from. I found out later that it wasn't the last straw. It was just the opening act. 2 days later, I got a call from my mortgage lender. Hi, Mr. O'Connell, the rep said politely. We've received a request from a third party to transfer the deed on your property. We just wanted to confirm that this is something you authorized. My stomach dropped. No, I said immediately. I didn't authorize anything like that. Who requested it? They couldn't tell me over the phone without a formal inquiry, but I didn't need to guess. I called my brother that night and asked him point blank if Mom and Dad had said anything about trying to take the house. There was a pause before he said quietly, they mentioned something about getting it put back in their name. Connor, what's going on? They're acting like you're trying to evict them. They're trying to steal the house out from under me, I said flatly. My brother whistled under his breath. Look, I know they're being dramatic, but I don't think. Save it, I said, cutting him off. If they think this is how they get me back under control, they're dead wrong. But as angry as I was, I still held off on doing anything drastic. I wanted to see what else they would do. And sure enough, they didn't disappoint. The following weekend, Natalie and I drove out to grab dinner. When we came home, I noticed something was off. The side gate to my backyard was open. When I went around to check, I realized someone had gone through my trash. The bags had been ripped open, scattered across the grass. Inside, old bank statements and utility bills I'd shredded were lying in a soggy pile. Someone had been looking for information. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Natalie looked uneasy. Do you think it was them? I know it was them, I said. The next day, I installed security cameras around the house. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to have proof of everything. And then came the final straw, the thing that turned this from just a family feud into something much deeper. A certified letter arrived in the mail addressed to me. Inside was a formal notice. My parents had hired a lawyer and were petitioning for what they called reimbursement of funds expended on behalf of Connor O'Connell. In plain English, they were suing me for all expenses incurred raising me from birth to age 18. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking so badly that I had to sit down. They were actually trying to bill me for being their child. Natalie came into the room and found me staring at the letter. What is it? She asked. And when I handed it to her, her face went pale. They can't be serious. Oh, they're serious, I said bitterly. Something inside me hardened in that moment. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control, about them trying to prove they still had the power to make me dance when they pulled the strings. I stood up, grabbed the deed papers they'd dropped on my driveway, and fed them one by one into the shredder. The sound of the paper tearing was louder than I expected, and with every sheet that disappeared into the machine, I felt a little lighter. If they wanted a war, they had just declared it. And that was the moment I decided that I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure they never had this kind of hold over me again. What I did next is what set everything in motion. After shredding those deed papers, I expected to feel liberated. And for about a day, I did. It was like I'd physically destroyed the weight they'd been holding over me. But then the fallout really began. And for a while, I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. The first sign came that Monday morning. I was sitting at my desk at work when my phone lit up with a call from HR. Connor, can you come to my office? My stomach tightened. I hadn't done anything wrong, but that's never a fun way to start a conversation. When I walked in, my manager and the HR rep were both sitting there looking uncomfortable. We've received some concerning calls, the HR rep said carefully. Someone claiming to be your father reported that you've been committing financial fraud and using company resources for personal gain. I felt my blood run cold. That's not true, I said immediately. We figured as much, my manager said quickly. But you understand we still have to document this and look into it. I nodded numbly. Of course, I understood. But that didn't stop the wave of humiliation that hit me as I walked back to my desk and saw my coworkers' curious glances. My own parents had tried to get me in trouble at work. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the wall for a long time, barely hearing Natalie as she tried to comfort me. I'd always thought the worst they could do was guilt-trip me, maybe yell at me, maybe disown me. But this was something else. This was them actively trying to ruin my life. And the hits kept coming. The very next day, I got a notice from the bank that someone had attempted to access my accounts. They'd entered the wrong password too many times, triggering a temporary lock. I had to spend half the day on the phone with the bank, getting everything reset and adding extra security. When I finally got back into my account, I saw that someone had also tried to set up an auto payment using my information to pay their utility bill. "They're getting desperate," Natalie said softly when I told her. "They're getting dangerous," I corrected. For the next couple of weeks, it felt like I was living under siege. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. One day, it was a message from a relative saying, "Your mom says you're leaving them homeless." Is that true? The next day, it was a certified letter from their lawyer. This time, threatening to put a lien on my house, the one I owned outright, if I didn't resume the mortgage payments on theirs. I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if they actually succeeded in ruining my job? What if they convinced the court to force me to keep paying? What if this never ended? Natalie tried to stay strong for me, but I could tell it was wearing on her, too. One night, we were sitting at the kitchen table, a pile of legal papers spread out in front of us, and she said quietly, "I feel like we can't even enjoy being married right now. It's like they've turned this whole first year into a battlefield." I hated that she was right. This was supposed to be the happiest season of our lives. And instead, it felt like we were constantly on the defensive. And then came the breaking point. The moment that finally pushed me all the way down to rock bottom. I was at work when my brother called. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me hoped he might finally be calling to apologize, to say he'd talk some sense into them. Instead, his first words were, "You should know Mom and Dad are moving in with Aunt Lisa for now. They said you left them no choice." "Good," I said flatly, but he didn't stop. "They also said they're going to start selling your stuff from the garage to cover the bills until you come to your senses." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" "They still have a key," he reminded me. I was in my car and driving home before he'd even finished the sentence. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the garage door was already halfway open. Inside, my dad was standing there with one of my toolboxes in his hands, and a stranger, someone from the neighborhood, I guessed, was standing next to him with cash in hand. "What are you doing?" I shouted as I jumped out of the car. My dad had the audacity to look offended. "Trying to keep the lights on, Connor, since he won't help." I walked straight past him, grabbed the toolbox, and yanked it out of his hands. "Get out. Right now. Don't talk to me like that," he barked. "Get out." My voice was shaking with anger. He dropped the box on the floor and stormed past me, muttering under his breath. The buyer backed away slowly, clearly uncomfortable, and left without another word. When they were gone, I locked the garage, then the front door, then every other door in the house. Then I went upstairs and found the spare key they had, and snapped it in half with a pair of pliers. And then I sat on the kitchen floor and cried. I hadn't cried like that in years. Not since I was a kid. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was grief. Grief for the family I thought I had. Grief for the idea that if I just worked hard enough and gave enough, they would finally see me as worthy. That night, after I'd calmed down, I sat with Natalie on the couch and said, "I can't keep living like this. If I don't do something, this will never end." "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "I mean, it's time to stop reacting to them and start thinking long-term. If they want a war, then fine, but I'm not going to fight it on their terms anymore." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "So what's the plan?" I didn't have all the details yet, but as I sat there staring at the legal papers on the table and the broken key in the trash, I started to picture it. This wasn't just about cutting them off anymore. This was about making sure they could never do this to me again. The first step was going to hurt, but it was necessary. I was going to legally separate myself from every tie I still had to them. No more shared accounts, no more co-ownership, no more leverage for them to use. And once that was done, well, I had some ideas about what might come next. But first, I had to dig myself out of the hole they'd shoved me into. The very next morning, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The fear was still there, the pit in my stomach every time I thought about my parents and their threats. But now it was mixed with something else, determination. If I was going to get my life back, I couldn't just sit around waiting for their next move. I started small. I called the mortgage lender first, explaining the entire situation calmly and professionally. I sent them copies of the quitclaim papers my parents had dropped off, the threatening letters, and the notice from their lawyer. The woman on the other end of the line was sympathetic. "Mr. O'Connell," she said, "you are the sole responsible party on this mortgage. No one else has the right to transfer or control this property without your consent. If anyone tries, you are within your rights to challenge it." That gave me my first breath of relief in weeks. Legally, I was still in control, but I knew that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to be reactive. I wanted to make it impossible for them to pull this kind of stunt ever again. So, I hired my own lawyer. Sitting across from her in her office felt surreal, like I was finally putting up a shield after years of standing bare-chested in front of arrows. I laid everything out: the bills I'd been paying, the mortgage arrangement, the harassment, the attempts to take over the deed, even the false report to my company. She listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes. And when I was done, she said, "Connor, you have more power here than you realize. If you want to cut ties financially, we can do that. If you want to send a cease and desist letter to stop the harassment, we can do that, too. And if you want to go one step further and protect yourself legally, we can restructure everything so there is nothing they can claim in the future." For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt my chest loosen. There was a way out. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and meetings. My lawyer helped me move the mortgage into a legal trust under my name, something that gave me full control but removed my parents from the equation completely. We drafted letters formally severing me from responsibility for their utilities and debts, with copies sent to every creditor to ensure nothing could come back to me. And we filed a formal response to their lawyer's ridiculous reimbursement petition, including documentation of every dollar I had spent keeping them afloat for the last 10 years. It wasn't just about protecting myself legally. It was about reclaiming my mental space. And with every step, I felt stronger. Meanwhile, my career was taking off. My company completed its investigation into the bogus fraud accusations my parents had made, and not only cleared me completely, but actually promoted me 2 months later. "We were impressed with how you handled that situation," my manager said. "You stayed calm and professional, even under unfair pressure. That kind of composure is leadership material." The promotion came with a hefty raise and a bonus that made my jaw drop when I saw the number. I walked out of that meeting with a grin that wouldn't leave my face. It was as if the universe was saying, "See, you don't need them. You never did." With the raise, I started building up savings again, but this time for me and Natalie. We paid off her student loans, renovated the guest bedroom into an office, and even booked a second honeymoon, one that was longer and somewhere far away from all the drama. And something else started happening, too. My relationship with Natalie got stronger. Without my parents' constant interference hanging over us, we were able to just breathe. We had slow Saturday mornings making pancakes together, nights curled up watching movies without my phone buzzing with another crisis, and conversations about the future that actually felt exciting instead of terrifying. Of course, my parents didn't go quietly. They kept trying to guilt-trip me through relatives, but I stopped responding. My lawyer handled all communication with them now, which meant I no longer had to see the venom they were spitting my way. When my mom sent a long, tearful email about how I was killing the family, I didn't even open it. I just forwarded it to my lawyer and went back to my work presentation. And as the noise died down, something strange happened. I started to feel free. Free from the constant need to please. Free from the fear of being cut out of their will or being disowned. Free from the belief that I was responsible for everyone else's happiness. That freedom gave me space to think bigger. I started volunteering for projects at work that scared me, big, challenging ones that put me in front of executives. I started networking with colleagues in other departments. I even joined a mentorship program, helping younger employees navigate their careers. And slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't just surviving this storm, I was thriving. One day, I came home from work and found Natalie sitting at the kitchen counter with a mischievous smile. "What?" I asked, grinning despite myself. She slid an envelope toward me. Inside was a set of travel documents, flights, and hotel bookings. "Surprise. I booked us a trip to Italy. We leave in 3 weeks." I blinked at her. "You did this without telling me. You've been working so hard," she said softly. "You deserve a break." "We both do. Besides, it's time to start making happy memories again, don't you think?" I smiled. Really smiled for what felt like the first time in a long time. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I think it is." That night, as we ate dinner, I caught myself thinking about the empty chairs at my wedding again. But this time, I didn't feel pain. I felt gratitude. Because those empty chairs had shown me who my parents really were and who I needed to become. By the time we left for Italy, I wasn't the same man who had sat crying on the kitchen floor a few months earlier. I was stronger, more focused, and far less willing to tolerate disrespect in my life. But there was still one thing left unresolved. One last step I needed to take to truly put this behind me. And as fate would have it, an opportunity was about to drop into my lap that would allow me to take that step and change everything forever. Because while I had been quietly building my life back up, my parents had been doing the exact opposite. And soon I would have the chance to show them once and for all that the days of me being their safety net were over. And this time, they wouldn't just hear it, they would feel it. The turning point came one Friday afternoon, months after I'd finally put my legal and financial house in order. I was sitting in my office, wrapping up some work before heading home, when I got a call from an old friend of mine, Daniel, who worked at a regional real estate firm. "Connor," he said after the usual greetings, "you're never going to believe who I just saw in my office." I raised an eyebrow. "You know I hate guessing games." He chuckled. "Your parents. They were here trying to get a home equity line of credit approved. But here's the thing. They don't have the income or the credit to qualify. The only reason they even still have that house is because you've been paying the mortgage, and apparently the bank already flagged them for missed payments since you cut them off." I felt my jaw tighten. "So what happened?" "Well," he said carefully, "they left pretty upset, but they also left a big folder behind with their financial documents in it. Pay stubs, debt records, even some letters they've been writing to other relatives about you." I skimmed one, "Connor. They've been telling people that you abandoned them, that you owe them for everything they spent raising you, that you're trying to force them out of the house so you can sell it and keep the money." My stomach twisted. "Are you saying they're spreading that to the whole family?" "Worse," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "They've been talking to people about getting you blacklisted at work. They said they were going to find a way to ruin your reputation so you'd come crawling back." I sat back in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly they hurt. It was one thing to threaten me directly, but to actively try to destroy my career and my relationships? That was crossing a line I couldn't ignore. "Do me a favor," I said finally. "Hold on to those documents. I'll come by and pick them up." When I showed up at Daniel's office later that day, he handed me a thick folder. Inside was everything. Their bank statements, letters to other relatives, copies of emails they'd sent trying to get credit lines approved, and most interestingly, overdue notices from multiple creditors. They were in way more trouble financially than I'd even realized. That night, I spread everything out on the kitchen table. Natalie sat across from me, her expression a mix of sympathy and quiet anger as she read through the letters. "This is bad," she said finally, setting one down. "They're not just lying about you. They're trying to rewrite history so they can play the victims." "I know," I said quietly. "So what are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I kept flipping through the documents until I found what I was looking for, a letter from the mortgage company, warning that they were officially 3 months behind, and foreclosure proceedings would begin if payment wasn't received by the end of the next billing cycle. And that's when it hit me, the thing I hadn't let myself think about before. If I paid off the balance, the house would be mine outright. It already legally was, but this would close the door completely on any claims they might try to make. But I didn't just want to save the house. I wanted to use it as leverage, as the final statement that I was done being manipulated. "I'm going to pay off the mortgage," I said finally. Natalie blinked. "I thought you said you didn't want to keep supporting them." "I don't," I said, a slow smile forming. "That's the point. Once the house is paid off, it's mine. Legally, indisputably mine. And then they can either pay me rent like normal tenants, or they can leave. No more pretending it's theirs. No more strings." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's actually brilliant." It wasn't easy pulling together the money. Even with my raise and bonus, it was a big chunk of my savings. But I ran the numbers and realized I could do it without jeopardizing our future plans. And so, over the next 2 weeks, I worked with my lawyer and the mortgage company to arrange a full payoff. When the final confirmation came through that the mortgage was settled, I just sat there staring at the document. For nearly a decade, that house had been the invisible chain they used to keep me in line. Now, it was no longer a burden. It was a tool. But I wasn't done. My lawyer suggested that since my parents were still technically living in the property, I formalized the arrangement with a rental agreement. This way, she explained, if they refuse to pay or continue to harass you, you have grounds to evict them legally. You're not just the dutiful son anymore. You're the landlord. I signed the paperwork that same afternoon, and as if the universe wanted to add one more layer to my new position of strength, an opportunity came up at work that made my power even more concrete. A leadership program that trained employees for director-level roles. My manager nominated me personally. You've proven you can handle pressure, she said. This is the next step. It felt like every piece was falling into place at once. I wasn't just regaining control of my life. I was stepping into a position where I could no longer be held hostage by anyone else's decisions. But before I made my next move, I wanted to be absolutely sure I had everything lined up. So, I kept quiet for another month, letting my parents dig themselves deeper. And sure enough, they did. They sent another round of threatening messages, telling me they were considering taking the house back by force. I didn't reply, but I saved every single message. By the time the lease agreement was finalized, the security cameras were in place, and my lawyer had prepared the formal notice. I was ready. One night after dinner, I sat with Natalie and slid the finalized paperwork across the table. It's time, I said simply. Her eyes widened as she read the letter. You're really doing it? Yes, I said, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. They wanted to treat this like a war. Fine, but now I make the rules. And with that, we picked a date to deliver the news. A date that by pure coincidence lined up with my parents' annual summer barbecue, the one where the entire extended family would be present. If they wanted an audience for their performance, I was going to give them one. But this time, I would be the one holding the microphone. And the moment they heard what I had to say, I knew everything would change. The day of the barbecue arrived, hot and sunny, the kind of summer afternoon where the air feels heavy and smells of charcoal from a dozen grills around the neighborhood. I hadn't been to one of my parents' gatherings in over a year, and driving up to their house felt surreal. But as I pulled into the familiar driveway, my driveway, legally speaking, I didn't feel dread. I felt calm. Natalie squeezed my hand from the passenger seat. You ready for this? She asked softly. I smiled, not the forced kind I'd worn so many times before, but a real, steady smile. I've never been more ready. We walked into the backyard where the whole family was already gathered. My parents were near the grill, my mom wearing that fixed, polite smile she always put on when she was performing for an audience. My dad glanced up and froze when he saw me. I could see the flicker of annoyance cross his face before he schooled it back into something neutral. Well, he said loudly enough for half the yard to hear. Look who finally decided to show his face. There were a few murmurs from the relatives who hadn't seen me since before the wedding. I could feel their eyes on me, curious, expectant. My mom wiped her hands on a towel and came over, her smile tight. Connor, she said, you could have warned us you were coming. We would have. I'm not here for the food, I said evenly. Her smile faltered. Actually, I continued, projecting my voice just enough for everyone to hear. I'm here to make an announcement. Since it seems the family grapevine has been busy, I thought it would be best to clear things up all at once. A hush fell over the group. Even the kids stopped chasing each other and looked toward us. I pulled a folded document from my pocket and held it up. As of last month, this house is officially paid off, completely, legally, in full. And since the mortgage was always under my name, that means this house is now mine outright. My dad's face went red. You can't just... Yes, I can, I said calmly. And I have. I handed the document to my brother, who had been hovering nearby, looking uncomfortable. He scanned it, his eyes widening slightly, and then nodded. He's not lying, he muttered, passing it back. I turned back to my parents. Now, because I'm not heartless, I've given you two choices. Option 1. You sign this lease agreement and start paying fair market rent starting next month. Option 2. You move out within 60 days. Your choice. The silence that followed was so thick, you could have heard a pin drop. My mom's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words, but couldn't decide which ones would sting the most. Finally, she managed. You'd really evict your own parents? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let anger creep in. I just said, I'd really stop letting myself be manipulated. This house has been used to control me for nearly 10 years. That ends now. My dad barked out a bitter laugh. You think you're so clever? What will the family think when they see what you're doing? I looked around the yard, meeting the eyes of each aunt, uncle, and cousin watching. I think they'll understand when they see the full picture. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the small Bluetooth speaker I'd brought with me, and hit play. The audio that filled the yard was from a voicemail my parents had left me 2 months ago, one where my mom had screamed that I was a disgrace, and my dad had threatened to take the house back by force if I didn't start paying again. I let it play in full, standing silently as the color drained from my mom's face. When it ended, I said simply, "This is what I've been dealing with. I have spent tens of thousands of dollars keeping this house from being foreclosed. I paid their bills for years. I even flew them across the country for my wedding, only to have them skip it for a baby shower. And still, they tried to take me to court to make me pay more. If any of you think I'm being unreasonable, now you know the whole story." For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then my Aunt Lisa, the one who had hosted the baby shower they skipped my wedding for, cleared her throat. "I didn't know it was like that," she said quietly. "They told us you just abandoned them." "They lied," I said. Murmurs rippled through the group. I saw my cousin, the one whose baby shower they prioritized, frown and shake her head. "That's messed up," she muttered. My mom's composure cracked. "You're humiliating us in front of everyone." "No," I said gently but firmly. "You did that yourselves. I'm just done covering for you." With that, I pulled the lease agreement from my pocket and set it on the patio table. "You have until the end of the month to sign this. If you don't, my lawyer will begin formal eviction proceedings. Either way, this is no longer your house to hold over me." Then I turned and walked out, Natalie's hand in mine, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. We didn't say a word until we got back in the car. Then Natalie let out a long, shaky breath. "That was intense." "It needed to be," I said, my voice steady. And as we drove away, I felt something deep inside me settle, like I had finally put down a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. But the fallout from that day was just beginning. Because my parents weren't used to losing, and the way they reacted next would make it clear that for them, this wasn't just about a house. It was about control, and I was about to show them that they no longer had any. The fallout began before Natalie and I even made it home. My phone started buzzing with text after text, first from my mom, then my dad, then even my brother. "How dare you do that in front of everyone? You've embarrassed this family for the last time. You can't actually go through with this." I didn't reply to a single one. My lawyer had told me to let all communication go through her from this point forward. So, I simply forwarded everything to her inbox and went about my evening. Natalie and I ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and put on a movie. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel my chest tighten every time my phone lit up. 2 days later, my lawyer sent the formal notice. Either my parents signed the lease agreement by the date listed, or eviction proceedings would begin. There was no room left for debate. No loopholes they could exploit. The power was entirely in my hands now, and I could tell they hated it. The calls from relatives started again. Aunt Lisa called first, trying to smooth things over. "Connor, maybe this has all gone a little too far," she said carefully. "Your mom is devastated. Can't you just forgive them and put this behind you?" I stayed calm. Forgiveness doesn't mean putting myself back in a situation where I'm constantly manipulated. I've made my decision. When she tried to argue, I said gently but firmly, "Lisa, you weren't there when they left that voicemail. You weren't there when they tried to sell my things to strangers. This is what it took for them to take me seriously." She went quiet after that, and I think that was the moment the tide began to turn. Word spread quickly through the family, and this time, it wasn't my parents controlling the narrative. My cousin started texting me privately, saying things like, "Good for you, man. I can't believe they tried to take the house," and honestly, someone had to stand up to them eventually. As the support rolled in, my parents' attempts to save face became more and more desperate. They sent out a mass email to the family, claiming that I was kicking them out onto the street and abandoning my blood, but no one seemed to buy it anymore. Then came the deadline day. My lawyer and I waited at her office for the signed lease agreement to come in, but nothing arrived. Instead, she got an email from my parents' attorney saying they refused to sign and considered my actions a betrayal. "Then we moved forward," I said simply. And so we did. The eviction process wasn't immediate. It took a few weeks of hearings and paperwork, but because everything had been set up legally and carefully, it was smooth. My lawyer presented the mountain of documentation we'd gathered, proof of payments I'd made for nearly a decade, records of their harassment, even security footage of my dad trying to sell my belongings. The judge didn't take long to rule in my favor. My parents were given 30 days to vacate. The day the order came down, my mom sent me one last message. You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief. When the move-out day came, I showed up with my lawyer and a locksmith. My parents were still there, sulking in the living room. They didn't say a word to me as the movers carried out the last of their boxes. When the house was finally empty, the locksmith changed every lock. Standing there in the quiet afterward, I felt an overwhelming wave of peace. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, letting it sink in that this was finally over. No more late-night calls about unpaid bills. No more threats. No more guilt hanging over my head like a storm cloud. Natalie joined me in the kitchen, slipping her hand into mine. How do you feel? She asked softly. I looked around at the house, my house, and smiled. Like I can breathe again. Over the next few months, we renovated. Fresh paint, new furniture, a backyard garden. We turned what had once been a source of stress into a place that finally felt like home. As for my parents, they moved in with a distant cousin 2 towns over. Word was they were still complaining to anyone who would listen about how ungrateful I was. But by then, no one was listening. Even my brother, who had once been their staunchest defender, called me one evening and said quietly, "You were right. They were never going to stop. I think you did the only thing you could." That call meant more to me than I could say. The next time we hosted a family gathering, the empty chairs at the table weren't painful reminders anymore. They were symbols of a boundary that had been set once and for all. And as I looked around at my friends, my cousins, and Natalie laughing beside me, I realized something important. I hadn't just saved myself from their control. I'd saved the life I was building from being swallowed by their chaos. When everyone had gone home that night, I stepped out onto the porch, looked at the quiet street, and felt that calm settle over me once again. They said I'd regret this, I murmured to Natalie. She leaned against me, smiling softly. Do you? I looked back at the house that was finally completely mine, and shook my head. No, I said. I think this is the first decision in my life I'll never regret. And for the first time since that wedding day, I knew with absolute certainty I was free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more crazy Reddit tales, and ring the bell so you never miss the next one. And hey, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you would have done in this situation.